In the kingdom where beauty determines destiny, they called her the Scarred One. Cast out from noble society, she found refuge in the forgotten corners of the realm where shadows kept her company and silence became her closest friend. But fate had other plans. When the blind prince arrived at her door, he saw what others couldn't, not with his eyes but with his heart. He recognized the strength in her gentle voice, the grace in her careful movements, and the nobility in her wounded soul. Now, as he stands before the royal court, declaring his intention to marry her, the whispers begin. Will love truly be enough to challenge centuries of prejudice? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The music box sat on her windowsill, its once gleaming surface now warped and blackened by flame. Arya ran her fingers across its scorched lid, feeling the places where gilt roses had melted into twisted shapes. It was the only thing she'd saved from the fire, the last remnant of the life she'd lost 10 years ago. She wound the key carefully, and despite its scars, the box still played her mother's favorite melody. The notes emerged tentatively at first, then gained strength, like morning light creeping through storm clouds. Duchess Katerina had always said this tune was magical, that it could make even the stars dance. You were wrong about the magic, Mother, Arya whispered to the empty room. It couldn't save us that night. The memories came unbidden, as they always did when she touched the box. She was 16 again, awakening to choking smoke and her mother's desperate screams. The grand manor house, pride of the northern province, had become a maze of flame and shadow. She remembered stumbling through corridors where tapestries burned. Like funeral pyres, clutching the music box her mother had pressed into her hands moments before, pushing her toward the servants' stairs. "Run, my love. Don't look back." Those were the last words she heard her mother speak. Arya had run, but she'd looked back. She would always look back. The image was seared into her mind as surely as the flames had seared her flesh. The east, wing collapsing in a storm of sparks, taking her parents with it. The scar that curved from her left temple to her collarbone was a constant reminder of her desperate attempt to reach them, of the burning beam that had nearly claimed her life as well. The servants who pulled her from the wreckage had saved her body, but they couldn't save her place in society. In the weeks that followed, as she lay wrapped in bandages in the local healer's cottage, the whispers began. The great houses that had once courted her family's favor now turned their backs. No one would claim responsibility for the orphaned daughter of Duchess Katerina, not with those scars. Such a tragedy, they said, their words dripping false sympathy. And she was such a pretty thing before. The music box's melody reached its final notes, fading like a ghost at dawn. Arya closed its lid, her fingertips lingering on the damaged clasp. Inside, hidden beneath the mechanism, lay her mother's last gift, a small compartment containing a ring bearing the family crest and a note written in her elegant hand. "Remember who you are, my darling. Beauty fades, but nobility lives in the heart." She'd tried to live by those words in the years since, building a quiet life in this cottage at the edge of the royal forest. The local villagers came to her for healing herbs and poultices, though few would meet her eyes directly. They left their payments on her doorstep, coins wrapped in cloth, baskets of bread and vegetables, as if afraid that meeting her gaze might somehow transfer her misfortune to them. Only the music box knew her true identity now. To everyone else, she was simply the Scarred One, the mysterious healer who kept to the shadows. The noble houses had written their own version of events, that the entire family had perished in the fire, that the estate had passed to distant relatives. It was easier than acknowledging the truth, that they had abandoned a young girl to fate rather than accept the mark of tragedy upon her face. A sharp rap at her door startled Arya from her reverie. Through the warped glass of her window, she could make out an unfamiliar silhouette, tall, elegant, clearly noble by the set of their shoulders. Her heart quickened. No one from court had come this far into the forest in years. She touched the music box once more, drawing strength from its familiar presence. Then, squaring her shoulders, she reached for the heavy shawl she kept by the door. It was the armor she wore now, its dark folds hiding the worst of her scars from curious eyes. "Coming," she called, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. She didn't know it then, but this moment, this single knock at her door, would change everything. Before opening the door, Arya quickly slipped her mother's ring from the music box into a pocket of her dress. Her fingers brushed against the worn leather cover of her herbalist's journal, constant companion and keeper of her secrets. The book had started as a simple record of healing remedies, but over the years it had become something more. Between recipes for fever tinctures and wound poultices, she had written the true story of her life, encrypted in the ancient botanical language her mother had taught her. Drawing her shawl closer, she opened the door to find not one visitor, but two. A royal guard stood at attention, his crimson uniform stark against the forest's muted greens. Beside him, a figure in midnight blue silk leaned on an intricately carved walking staff, head tilted slightly as if listening to the wind in the trees. "My lord," Arya said softly, recognizing the royal insignia on the guard's breast. "How may I be of service?" The man with the staff turned toward her voice, and Arya's breath caught. This was no ordinary noble. This was Prince Thaddeus, whose reputation had reached even her secluded cottage. The blind prince, they called him, who had lost his sight to fever as a child, but gained, some said, the ability to see into people's hearts. "Are you the healer?" His voice was gentle, cultured, carrying none of the imperious tone she remembered from court. "The villagers speak highly of your skills." Arya hesitated, conscious of the guard's careful scrutiny. "I have some knowledge of healing herbs, my lord. Though I'm sure the royal physicians cannot help with this particular ailment," the prince finished, a slight smile playing at his lips. "May we come in? The journey has been long, and I find myself in need of rest." She stepped aside, mind racing. Her cottage was clean but modest, nothing like the grandeur of the palace. The guard entered first, scanning the room with professional efficiency before nodding to the prince. As Thaddeus crossed her threshold, his walking staff caught the edge of her herb-drying rack, sending bundles of lavender and rosemary swaying. "Forgive me," he said, reaching out to steady the rack. His fingers brushed the herbs, and his smile deepened. "Ah, lavender, for sleep and serenity, and rosemary, for remembrance, yes?" Arya stared at him, surprised. Few nobles bothered to learn the properties of common herbs. "You know the old teachings? I find that when one sense is diminished, others must be sharpened." He moved further into the room, his staff tapping lightly against the floorboards. The language of scents and textures becomes quite fascinating when you can no longer rely on sight. The guard took up position by the door as Thaddeus settled into one of her simple wooden chairs. Arya busied herself with her kettle, grateful for the familiar ritual of tea-making. Her hands trembled slightly as she selected dried chamomile and mint, calming herbs for what promised to be an unsettling conversation. "Your reputation reached me through interesting channels," the prince continued. "A kitchen maid spoke of how you healed her child's fever when no one else could help. A stable boy mentioned a salve that saved his father's leg from amputation." He paused, head tilted. "Yet you keep no shop in the village, accept no formal patients. Why is that?" Arya placed a cup of tea before him, watching as steam curled in the afternoon light. "Some people prefer their healers to remain unseen. My lord." "Ah." That single syllable carried volumes of understanding. "And what do you prefer?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her preference for anything in years. She found herself reaching for her journal, fingers tracing its familiar spine. Within its pages lay the answer she couldn't voice. Detailed drawings of herbs and flowers, yes, but also dreams she'd never dared speak aloud. Dreams of walking in sunlight again, of using her knowledge openly instead of from the shadows. "Prefer to help where I can," she said finally. "The method matters less than the result." Thaddeus nodded slowly, his fingers exploring the carved surface of his walking staff. A diplomatic answer. But I wonder, does the healer not deserve healing as well? Before Arya could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Voices called in alarm, and the guard tensed, hand moving to his sword. Through her window, Arya could see a group of villagers approaching, carrying someone on a makeshift stretcher. "My lord," the guard began, but Arya was already moving. "Stay here," she said, reaching for her journal and the basket of supplies. She kept ready. "Someone's been hurt." As she hurried outside, she heard the prince say softly, "And now we shall see the healer at work." Prince Thaddeus remained in his seat as Arya rushed outside, but his attention never wavered from the unfolding scene. His fingers moved constantly over his walking staff, reading the carved stories that spiraled around its length like a memoir. Written in texture rather than ink, the staff had been a gift from his mother on his 16th birthday, 10 years after the fever that took his sight. Each notch and groove told a story, his first steps without a guide, his mastery of the palace grounds, the day he convinced the royal council to let him attend diplomatic meetings despite their protests. At the top, newest among the carvings, was a small maze pattern he'd added himself, representing his current quest. "Remarkable," he murmured, head tilted toward the window, as Arya's clear voice carried inside, directing the villagers with quiet authority. "Marcus, tell me what you see." The guard shifted from his position by the door. "The healer is treating a woodcutter, my lord. Looks like a bad axe wound to the leg. She's—" He paused, surprise coloring his voice. "She's not even flinching at the blood. Most ladies of gentle birth would swoon at such a sight." "Most ladies of gentle birth haven't had to rebuild themselves from ashes," Thaddeus replied softly, running, his thumb over a spiral in his staff that represented rebirth. "Watch closely, Marcus. What else?" "The villagers. They're keeping their distance, but they're following her instructions without question. She's using something from that journal of hers, some kind of poultice. The bleeding's already slowing." Another pause. "My lord, are you certain about this?" "The court will never—" "The court's definition of beauty has brought us to the brink of civil war," Thaddeus interrupted, his voice taking on an edge rarely heard outside the council chambers. 3 provinces in rebellion, the common people, losing faith in noble guidance, and all because we value appearance over substance. He stood, using his staff to navigate toward the herb-drying rack. His free hand reached up, fingers brushing the dried plants with deliberate care. "Do you know why I refused all those suitable matches my father proposed?" Marcus had served him long enough to recognize a rhetorical question. He remained silent as the prince continued his exploration of the cottage. "Every one of them was chosen for their perfect features, their flawless deportment, and every one of them spoke to me as though blindness had affected my mind as well as my eyes." Thaddeus paused at Arya's workbench, where various bottles and jars were arranged with precise care. They would describe themselves in excruciating detail, assuming that was what I most wanted to know. Not one of them thought to tell me about their dreams, their fears, what makes them laugh or cry. Outside, Arya's voice rose again, thanking the villagers who had helped carry the wounded man. The sound of retreating footsteps followed, then the soft click of the door as she returned inside. "The woodcutter will live," she announced, her footsteps, moving toward the washing basin. "Though he may need to find a new profession." "You've done this before," Thaddeus observed. "Treated serious injuries, I mean." A slight pause in the sound of water. "Yes. During the Northern Rebellion, when the fighting reached the forest borders." The water stopped entirely. Thaddeus could sense the sudden tension in the room. Here. The slight intake of breath from both Arya and Marcus. How did you know? Thaddeus smiled, fingers finding a particular notch in his staff, the one that marked the day he'd begun investigating reports of a mysterious healer who had saved dozens of lives during the rebellion, noble and common alike. I may be blind, my lady, but I have eyes everywhere in the kingdom, including among the soldiers who survived that bloody month thanks to a skilled healer who asked no questions about rank or allegiance. He turned toward her, using the sound of her breathing to gauge her position. That's when I began to suspect who you really were. The timing matched the rumors of the great fire at the northern estate. A noble daughter, presumed dead along with her family. And suddenly, a gifted healer appears in the forest, one who knows courtly language but chooses to live in isolation. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Arya spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you really here, my lord?" Thaddeus ran his fingers over the maze pattern at the top of his staff one last time. "Because, Lady Arya, daughter of Duchess Katerina, I believe you may be the key to healing more than just wounded bodies. Our kingdom is scarred, too, by prejudice, by rigid traditions, by the worship of superficial beauty, and I think it's time we showed them all a different kind of vision." He could hear her sharp intake of breath, could almost feel the weight of her stare. Behind him, Marcus shifted uncomfortably, no doubt thinking of the political storm that would follow what his prince was about to propose. Thaddeus took a step forward, holding out his free hand. "Will you help me? Not just as a healer, but as someone who understands that true beauty lies in actions rather than appearances." The cottage fell silent, except for the gentle swaying of dried herbs and the distant call of forest birds. In that moment, hanging between heartbeats, the future of a kingdom waited for an answer. The silence stretched, like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. Arya's hand trembled as she reached for the prince's outstretched fingers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. A drop of the woodcutter's blood had dried on her palm, a stark reminder of the world she inhabited now, so far from the pristine halls of court. "My lord," she said carefully, withdrawing her hand, "you don't know what you're asking. The court would never accept—" "The court accepted a blind prince," Thaddeus interrupted, his hand still extended, "though not without a fight. Every time they underestimated me, I proved them wrong. Every time they said I couldn't do something, I found a way." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to strike the cottage roof. Marcus moved to close the shutters, but Thaddeus raised his hand to stop him. "Listen," the prince said softly. "The rain tells stories too. Each drop has its own voice, its own journey from sky to earth. Most people only hear the noise, but when you learn to truly listen—" He tilted his head, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Your roof needs repair on the eastern corner." Despite herself, Arya laughed, a sound that surprised them both. "Are you offering to fix it, my lord?" "I might," he replied, his smile widening, "though I suspect I'd do more harm than good. But I can ensure it's repaired, along with anything else you need, if you'll consider my proposal." A flash of lightning illuminated the cottage, and in that brief, brilliant moment, Arya saw something that made her heart stop. There, tucked into the prince's belt, was a letter, rain-stained and worn, as if it had been read many times by careful fingers. She recognized the handwriting on its exposed edge. "That letter," she whispered. "Where did you get it?" Thaddeus reached for the paper, his movements deliberate. "It was found among the effects of a soldier who died in the Northern Rebellion, a letter of thanks from the healer who saved his companion's life." The handwriting matches several volumes in the Northern Estates Library, books on healing and herbalism, written by the late Duchess Katerina. He unfolded the letter carefully, his fingers tracing the water-warped edges. "I had it translated into raised script so I could read it myself. Would you like to hear what it says?" Arya closed her eyes, remembering the night she'd written those words by candlelight, her hands still shaking from hours of surgery. "I remember every word. Then, "You remember what you wrote about beauty," Thaddeus said quietly, "about how the soldier's concern for his friend, his willingness to risk his life to bring him to safety, showed more true nobility than any courtly gesture you'd ever witnessed. I was different then, angry at the world that had rejected me. No." Thaddeus took a step closer, and this time when he reached out, his fingers found her arm. "You were honest, and you still are. Every person you've helped in this forest, every life you've saved while asking nothing in return, that's the same truth you wrote about in this letter." The rain fell harder now, drumming against the roof like an army of tiny fists. A drop of water fell through the leaky corner, landing on the letter in Thaddeus's hands. Arya watched as it soaked into the paper, blurring the ink, just as tears had done years ago when she'd written it. "What exactly are you proposing, my lord?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. "An alliance," he replied, "one that would shake the foundations of court society. I need someone who understands both worlds, the nobility and the common people. Someone who has seen the best and worst of humanity and still chooses to help others. Someone who can help me bridge the growing divide in our kingdom." He paused, his unseeing eyes somehow finding her face. "And I need someone who remembers that true nobility lives in the heart." Arya's breath caught, her mother's words, written in the music box so long ago. "How did you—" "Your mother was wise," Thaddeus said softly. "She served on the royal council. Before her marriage, her words about inner nobility were recorded in the council archives. When I found your letter, when I began to piece together the truth about the Northern Estates healer, I had those archives read to me again and again." Another crack of thunder shook the cottage, and Arya steadied herself against her workbench. Her fingers brushed her journal, and she thought of all the dreams and fears she'd hidden in its pages, of how long she'd been running from her past, hiding in shadows. "And if I refuse, then I'll have your roof repaired anyway," Thaddeus said with a gentle smile. "And I'll respect your wishes, but I don't think you will refuse. Not when you've spent 10 years proving that appearances mean nothing compared to actions. Not when you have the chance to help others learn that same truth." He held out the rain-stained letter like an offering. "What do you say, Lady Arya? Are you ready to step out of the shadows?" That first night after the storm, Arya lit the copper lantern her father had brought from the eastern kingdoms. Its intricate piercework cast dancing shadows on the cottage walls, spirals and stars that seemed to move with a life of their own. She had kept it dark for years, afraid its distinctive light might draw unwanted attention. Now it served as a beacon, guiding Prince Thaddeus through the forest to their nightly conversations. "The lantern was a wedding gift to my parents," she explained as they sat in her small garden, the summer air heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. "Father said its light was meant to guide lost souls home." Thaddeus ran his fingers over the lantern's warm metal surface, reading its patterns like a book. "These designs, they tell a story, don't they? About a princess who became a star to light the way for her love. You know the Eastern tales? I had them read to me as a child after the fever. Stories were my windows to the world then." His fingers found a particular pattern. "This spiral represents her transformation, yes, the moment she chose to give up her earthly form for love." Arya watched his hands move across the lantern, marveling at how he saw through touch what others missed with sight. "Most people only notice that it's pretty. Most people are content with surfaces," he said softly. "They never learn to look deeper." In the weeks that followed, the lantern became their confidant, its gentle light witnessing countless conversations that stretched from dusk until dawn. Thaddeus spoke of his struggles at court, of counselors who whispered that a blind prince could never rule effectively. Arya shared stories of her life in hiding, of the villages she'd helped and the solace she'd found in healing others. "Tell me about the fire," he asked one night, as moths danced around the lantern's glow. "Not what others say happened. Tell me your truth." Arya's hands stilled on her embroidery, another skill recovered from her past life. Why do you want to know? Because you've never told anyone. And some wounds need words to heal. The lantern's light flickered as a breeze stirred the garden. In its shifting glow, Arya found herself speaking of things she'd buried deep. The smell of smoke that still haunted her dreams, the heat of flames against her skin, the terrible choice between running to safety or trying to reach her parents. "I heard my mother screaming," she whispered, her fingers clutching her needle like an anchor. Not in fear, she was calling for the servants to evacuate. Even then, she thought of others first. Thaddeus reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers with unerring accuracy. "You are your mother's daughter. Every time you help someone despite the risk of discovery, you honor her memory. Sometimes I wonder if she would recognize me now." "She would see you more clearly than anyone," he said firmly. Just as she saw beyond court facades to people's true nature. The lantern cast their shadows against the cottage wall, a prince and a hidden noble, both shaped by loss into something unexpected. In its light, Arya began to see herself differently, not as the scarred one, but as someone who had survived fire and emerged stronger. "The court appearances have begun, haven't they?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "The parade of suitable brides?" "Father is becoming insistent," Thaddeus admitted. "He fears the kingdom will not accept a blind king without a proper queen beside him." His smile turned wry, though his definition of proper seems limited to ladies who have never known hardship or made difficult choices. "And you haven't told him about me?" "Not yet. The timing must be right." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But soon, Arya. I won't keep you hidden in shadows forever. You've lived too long in darkness already." The lantern sputtered, briefly, and Arya rose to add more oil. As she opened its delicate door, she caught her reflection in the polished copper, scars and all. But for the first time in years, she didn't immediately look away. "What do you see?" Thaddeus asked, hearing her pause. "Someone who's tired of hiding," she replied softly. "Someone who might be ready to step into the light." The news reached Arya through Marcus, who arrived at her cottage one misty morning with a porcelain teacup clutched carefully in a gloved hand. Its delicate blue and gold pattern marked it as part of the royal service, but the dark stains around, its rim, told a more sinister story. "It was meant for the prince," Marcus said grimly, placing the cup on her workbench. "The taster caught it just in time, nightshade mixed with imported tea." Arya's hands shook as she examined the cup. The poison had been skillfully chosen. Nightshade's bitter taste would have been masked by the expensive black tea Thaddeus favored. "When?" "Yesterday, during the presentation of Lady Victoria's daughters." Marcus's expression darkened. "Someone knows he's been refusing the official candidates. They're getting desperate." Arya reached for her herbalist's journal, fingers quickly finding the pages on poisons and their antidotes. "Desperate enough to risk regicide? That's treason. It's worse than that." Marcus lowered his voice, though they were alone in the cottage. "The cup came from Lady Victoria's own service, but the poison, it bears a striking similarity to the mixtures found in the northern estate after the fire." The journal slipped from Arya's fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "No, that's impossible. The fire wasn't—" "I know," Marcus interrupted gently, "but someone wants the court to believe it was. Someone who might have access to old records, who might know about a noble daughter who survived." Arya's mind raced. Few people had access to the kind of detailed records that could link her to the northern estate. Fewer still would know enough about the ancient poisoner's arts to recreate a decade-old formula. "The royal archivist," she whispered, remembering a thin-faced woman who had always watched her family too closely at court functions. Lady Regina. She was obsessed with genealogies, with maintaining the purity of noble bloodlines. Marcus nodded grimly. "She's Lady Victoria's aunt, and she's been spending a lot of time in the restricted archives lately, researching old noble families. Arya's hand went to her scarred cheek, a habit born of stress. They're trying to prevent any investigation into my family's history. If Thaddeus keeps refusing suitable matches, if he starts asking too many questions about the northern estate, they'll make sure those questions lead to dangerous answers. Marcus straightened, his guard's training evident in his bearing. The prince asked me to tell you he won't be able to visit for a few days. The court physicians are insisting on keeping him under observation. But Arya barely heard him. She was staring at the teacup, seeing not poison but patterns. The same, in patterns that had decorated her mother's favorite tea service. The same service that had somehow survived the fire, only to disappear from the estate's inventory. Marcus, she said slowly, I need you to get a message to someone for me, someone who might remember things about the night of the fire that never made it into official records. Who? Old Sarah. She was our head housekeeper. After the fire, she took a position with the merchant families in the lower town. Arya's fingers traced the teacup's pattern, memory burning bright. She was the one who found me in the wreckage, and she was the one who packed away my mother's things while I was recovering. You think she knows something about Lady Regina? I think she knows something about everything. Arya's voice hardened with determination. My mother used to say that good housekeepers were the true historians of noble houses. They see everything, remember everything. Marcus studied her face, reading the change in her expression. The prince wanted you safe, hidden, and I wanted the same thing. For 10 years. Arya straightened, squaring her shoulders like the noble she'd been raised to be. But they've brought the fight to us. And if they want to use my family's tragedy as a weapon, they'll learn that fire doesn't just destroy, it forges, it strengthens. She picked up the poisoned teacup, its delicate beauty belying its deadly purpose. Find old Sarah. Tell her the daughter of Duchess Katerina needs to know the truth about the night her world burned. As Marcus turned to leave, Arya called after him softly, And tell Thaddeus. Tell him I understand now. Some battles can't be fought from the shadows. Old Sarah's message arrived with the dawn, carried by a breathless street urchin who disappeared into the morning mist as quickly as he'd come. The parchment was cheap, the handwriting shaky, but the words hit Arya like a physical blow. Lady Regina was there that night. She came with documents for your father to sign, documents about succession rights and bloodline purity. He refused. The fire started an hour later. Arya was still staring at the note when Marcus burst through her door, his usual composure shattered. The prince is calling an emergency session of the Royal Council. Now. What? But he was supposed to wait. Lady Regina showed him the succession documents. The ones proving your claim to the northern estate. Marcus's face was grim. She thought it would force him to denounce you. Instead, before he could finish, the sound of trumpets carried through the forest. The royal signal for an emergency proclamation. Arya's heart stopped as she recognized the traditional 3-blast pattern. The crown prince was about to address the kingdom. In her hands, old Sarah's note crumbled. We have to stop him. If he denounces Lady Regina without proof... My lady, Marcus interrupted, a strange light in his eyes. He's not denouncing anyone. He's making a declaration of marriage. The world seemed to tilt beneath Arya's feet. Through her window, she could see people gathering in the village square as a royal herald unrolled a magnificent scroll, its purple and gold trim, marking it as a formal proclamation of the highest order. I have to see, she whispered, reaching for her cloak. My lady, I have to know, Marcus. They reached the edge of the village just as the herald began to read, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Be it known throughout all lands under heaven's grace that His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Thaddeus, heir to the throne and protector of the realm, does hereby declare his intention to wed. Arya held her breath, feeling the weight of every eye in the square. Lady Arya of the Northern Province, daughter of Duchess Katerina, survivor of noble spirit and true heart, whose worth is measured not in unmarred flesh, but in unwavering courage. The crowd erupted in whispers. Near the front, Lady Regina's face had gone white with fury, but Arya barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the proclamation scroll itself, not its words, but its craftsmanship. There, worked into the elaborate border design, she recognized the same pattern as her mother's teacup, the same pattern that had decorated the Northern Estate's official documents, and now she understood it wasn't just decoration, it was a code, a way for noble houses to mark their most important records. "There's more," Marcus murmured, drawing her attention back to the herald. "Furthermore, His Royal Highness does hereby announce an investigation into the tragic fire at the Northern Estate, citing new evidence of foul play and conspiracy against the rightful heirs." Lady Regina turned sharply, her skirts swishing as she pushed through the crowd. But two royal guards stepped smoothly into her path. The herald continued, his voice growing stronger. "Let it be known that Prince Thaddeus, having been blessed by fate with sight beyond mere appearances, has found in Lady Arya the qualities most needed in a future queen: compassion tempered by hardship, wisdom earned through suffering, and strength proven in adversity." Arya felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not of shame or fear, but of a fierce, unexpected joy. The proclamation scroll caught the morning light, its golden threads gleaming like flames. But these flames didn't destroy. They illuminated, revealed, brought truth to light. "By my own hand and seal," the herald finished, "I do hereby stake my crown and honor on this truth, that true nobility, like true love, sees with the heart rather than the eyes." The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Some cheered, mainly villagers who had benefited from Arya's healing. Others muttered darkly, courtiers clutching their fine clothes as if her very presence might taint them. But through it all, Arya stood straight and still, her mother's ring warm against her chest. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't try to hide her scars. They were part of her story, proof of survival, badges of a strength she was only now beginning to fully understand. "He'll need you now," Marcus said softly. "The court will fight this with everything they have." Arya nodded, watching as the herald carefully rolled the proclamation scroll, the document that had just changed everything. "Then it's time they learned what I learned in the fire, that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." The dress arrived in a cedar chest that smelled of lavender and memory. Arya recognized the craftsmanship immediately. Old Sarah's sister had been the Northern Estate's seamstress, and these were her signature stitches. Somehow the old housekeeper had preserved more than just secrets. "Your mother commissioned it for your debut," Sarah explained in the note accompanying the chest. "We saved it from the fire, hidden among linens. I've altered it for you, my lady. The high collar can be adjusted as you wish." Arya lifted the gown from its nest of tissue paper. Deep blue silk shimmered like midnight water, decorated with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. The original design had been modified with subtle grace, a higher neckline, longer sleeves, clever draping that could conceal or reveal as she chose. But it was more than just a dress. It was armor. As she dressed for her first formal court appearance, Arya thought of all the times she'd imagined this moment as a girl. She'd pictured herself floating through the palace in beautiful gowns, turning heads with a perfect complexion and practiced smile. Now she would turn heads for different reasons. "Ready, my lady?" Marcus asked from outside her door. Arya studied her reflection one last time. The dress was perfect. Elegant but not showy, distinctive without drawing attention to what it concealed. Most importantly, it made her feel like herself again, not the scarred healer or the lost noble, but someone new, someone stronger. "Ready," she replied, opening the door. The palace corridors were exactly as she remembered, yet everything felt different. Guards and servants stopped to stare as she passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly concealed horror. Arya kept her head high, channeling her mother's grace. They reached the grand ballroom just as the herald announced, Lady Arya of the Northern Province, betrothed to Crown Prince Thaddeus. The crowd parted like water around a stone. In the sudden silence, Arya could hear the whisper of her silk skirts against marble floors. She felt hundreds of eyes examining every inch of her visible skin, searching for the scars they'd heard so much about. Near the throne, Lady Victoria's daughters huddled together, whispering behind jeweled fans. Their mother stood rigid with disapproval, while Lady Regina's absence was conspicuous. The king himself sat forward slightly, his expression unreadable, but Arya saw none of them. Her attention was fixed on Thaddeus, standing tall beside his father's throne. His carved staff gleamed with fresh polish, and his unseeing eyes were turned unerringly toward her approaching footsteps. When she reached the dais, Arya sank into a perfect curtsy, muscle memory from years of training. "Your Majesties, Your Highness." "Rise, Lady Arya," the king commanded. His voice was neutral, careful. "We would see the woman our son has chosen." The emphasis on "see" was subtle but clear. Arya straightened slowly, feeling the weight of judgment pressing down like a physical thing. In the crowd, someone gasped as the ballroom's bright lighting revealed the full extent of her scars. But before anyone could speak, Thaddeus stepped forward. His hand found hers with practiced ease, and he raised it to his lips. "Father, honored court, I present to you the lady who will be your future queen, one who has proven her nobility not through unblemished features, but through unbroken spirit." "Pretty words," Lady Victoria called out, her voice dripping contempt. "But the people expect certain standards from their rulers. How can she represent the kingdom's grace and beauty when she herself is so marked?" The word hung in the air like poison. Arya felt Thaddeus tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand, stepping forward. "My Lady Victoria," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "Would you judge a sword by its sheath rather than its steel, or dismiss a healing potion because its bottle is cracked?" She gestured to her dress, its elegant design drawing appreciative murmurs despite the tension. "Beauty takes many forms, as does strength." "Pretty words indeed," the king mused, studying her with new interest. "You sound like your mother. She too had a way of making wisdom sound like poetry." "You knew my mother, Your Majesty?" "She served on my council before her marriage." Her voice is still missed in matters of diplomacy and justice. He leaned forward. "Tell me, Lady Arya, if you were to serve on that same council today, how would you address the growing unrest in our kingdom? The divide between noble and common that threatens our peace?" Arya felt the trap in his words, a test of both her intelligence and her loyalty to her class. But she thought of her years in the forest, of healing both nobles and peasants, of seeing humanity stripped bare of its trappings by pain and fear. "I would remind the council, Your Majesty, that a kingdom is like a body. When one part suffers, all parts are weakened. When we dismiss any citizen as worthless based on appearance or birth, we poison ourselves with prejudice." She straightened, feeling the perfect fit of her mother's dress. "I have lived in both worlds now. I have seen nobility in peasants and pettiness in peers. True worth, like true beauty, lies deeper than skin." A thoughtful silence fell over the ballroom. Then, unexpectedly, the king smiled. "Well spoken, Lady Arya. Perhaps my son's eyes see more clearly than we thought." The letters began arriving 3 days after her court appearance. They came through unusual channels, tucked into herb deliveries, hidden in bread from the village baker, slipped under her door by unseen hands. Each bore a different seal, but all carried the same message. Not everyone at court opposed the prince's choice. "My grandmother served with your mother on the king's council," wrote Lady Helena of the Western Province. "She spoke often of Duchess Katerina's wisdom. Perhaps it is time that wisdom returned to court." Another letter, this one bearing the seal of the Merchants' Guild. The common people have not forgotten your kindness during the Northern Rebellion. Count us among your allies. But it was the third letter that made Arya's hands tremble. Written in a shaky hand on simple parchment, it bore no seal at all. My lady, you won't remember me. I was a scullery maid at the Northern Estate the night of the fire. I saw Lady Regina leaving your father's study. She carried papers, documents she threw into the fire herself when she thought no one was watching. I've lived with this knowledge for 10 years, afraid to speak, but seeing you stand before the court unashamed of your scars, it gives me courage. I will testify if you need me. Arya was still staring at this last letter when Thaddeus arrived for their evening meeting. His footsteps were troubled, his carved staff tapping an agitated rhythm on the floor. "The council is divided," he said without preamble. "Your words moved many of the older members, those who remembered your mother. But Lady Victoria's faction is powerful, and they're pushing for adherence to the ancient laws of succession." "What? Ancient laws? Any heir to the throne must prove their bloodline pure and their form perfect." His voice was bitter. "They tried to use it against me when I lost my sight. Now they would use it against you." Arya spread the letters on her table, their seals catching the lamplight. "They're not as united as they seem. Look, support comes from unexpected quarters." Thaddeus ran his fingers over the seals, reading the raised impressions. "The Western Province, they control the trade routes. And the Merchants' Guild." He smiled slightly. "You've been busy making friends." "Not me. My mother." Arya picked up Lady Helena's letter. All these connections she built, all these lives she touched, they're like seeds she planted long ago, now bearing fruit. And the scullery maid's testimony could prove Lady Regina's involvement in the fire. But, Arya hesitated, using it would put the maid at risk. She's lived in fear for 10 years. "Like you have." "Yes." Arya touched her scars absently. "But I had the forest's protection. She has nothing." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus entered, his face grave. "My lord, my lady, you need to see this." He handed them a new letter, this one bearing the royal seal. Inside was a formal summons. The council demanded proof of Arya's nobility through the ancient trials of worth. "The trials haven't been invoked in 3 generations, Thaddeus said quietly. "They're designed to be impossible." "What do they involve?" 3 tests: birth, beauty, and spirit. You must prove your bloodline through ancient rites, demonstrate perfect noble bearing, and show wisdom worthy of a queen. His hand found hers in the darkness. No one has ever passed all 3. Arya looked at the pile of letters on her table. Ooh, messages of support from across the kingdom. Then at her mother's ring, still hanging from its chain around her neck. Finally, at her reflection in the window, scars clearly visible in the lamplight. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "that's because no one has ever taken the trials with truth rather than perfection as their goal." She picked up the scullery maid's letter again. "You said Lady Regina's faction is powerful, but power built on lies is like a house built on sand. One truth spoken bravely can wash it all away." "You'd risk everything? Your safety, your future?" "I've spent 10 years hiding from who I am." Arya straightened, feeling the strength of her mother's legacy flowing through her. "It's time to step into the light, scars, truth, and all." Thaddeus was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, that same smile that had first won her trust. "I'll have Marcus gather the witnesses. If we're going to challenge centuries of tradition, we'll need every ally we can get. And our enemies will. Learn what I learned long ago. The true sight comes from the heart, and true strength from overcoming adversity." He touched her scarred cheek gently. "You've already passed the hardest trial of all, surviving with your spirit intact." Arya looked at the letters once more, pieces of a puzzle she'd never expected to solve. Each one represented a thread, in a tapestry larger than herself, a pattern of change that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. "Then let the trials begin," she said softly. It's time to show the court what real nobility looks like. The ancient law book lay open on the council chamber table, its yellowed pages crackling with age. The tome was massive, bound in faded leather and reinforced with iron, its text written in the old script that few could still read. But it was the illuminated page facing Arya that drew every eye in the room. The laws of succession and worth, Lady Victoria read aloud, her finger tracing the gilded letters. Written in the kingdom's founding days to ensure only the most perfect specimens of nobility could rule. Her lips curved in a cruel smile. Perfect being the operative word. Arya stood still, feeling the weight of the council's stares. The morning light streaming through stained glass windows painted their faces in shifting colors, blue, gold, red, like masks constantly changing. Lord Chancellor Edmund, keeper of the ancient laws, cleared his throat. The text is quite specific. Any candidate for royal marriage must pass the 3 trials. First, the trial of birth, proving pure noble blood back 7 generations. Which I can do, Arya said quietly. The Northern Estates' records survived the fire. Second, the Chancellor continued as if she hadn't spoken, the trial of beauty, demonstrating the physical perfection required of royal blood. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Several council members glanced pointedly at Arya's scars, and finally the trial of spirit, proving wisdom and character worthy of the crown. He closed the book with a dusty thump. No candidate has completed all 3 trials in over 200 years. Because the trials themselves are relics of a less enlightened age. Thaddeus spoke from his place beside Arya. They measure superficial qualities while ignoring true worth. The law is the law, Your Highness, Lady Victoria said smoothly, unless you intend to break centuries of tradition. Perhaps it's time some traditions were broken. The new voice came from the chamber doorway. Old Sarah stood there, her plain, dressed stark against the council members' finery. In her arms she carried another book, smaller than the law tome, but somehow commanding just as much attention. This is a closed council session, Lady Victoria snapped. Guards! Let her speak. The king's quiet command stopped the guards in their tracks. Sarah served the Northern Estate faithfully for 40 years. If she has something to add to these proceedings, we will hear it. Sarah approached the council table, her steps sure despite her age. You speak of ancient laws, my lords and ladies, but there are older laws still. She placed her book beside the official tome. This is the true record, kept by the housekeepers of noble houses since the kingdom's founding. In it, we record what official histories often forget. She opened the book to a marked page. Here, the origin of the 3 trials. They were not created to ensure perfection, but to protect the kingdom from weak and cruel rulers. The trial of birth was meant to prove connection to the land itself, through families who had served it faithfully. The trial of beauty spoke not of physical perfection, but of the beauty of character that shines through actions, and the trial of spirit. She smiled slightly. Well, that one remains unchanged. True wisdom has always been rare. Lady Victoria's face had grown progressively redder. This is nonsense, common servants' gossip and folk tales. Is it? Sarah's voice sharpened. Then how do you explain this? She turned another page, revealing a detailed account of the night, of the Northern Estate fire. Every housekeeper keeps records of what they witness. Every servant knows the truth cannot be burned away so easily. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Lady Victoria lunged for the book, but Sarah was quicker, sliding it toward the king. He caught it with surprising agility, his eyes scanning the page with intense interest. Enough, his voice cut through the clamor. Lady Victoria, you will step back. Lady Regina will be summoned to answer these accusations. He turned to Arya, his expression thoughtful. As for the trials, they will proceed, but according to their original intent, rather than centuries of misinterpretation. Your Majesty, Lord Chancellor Edmund protested, "The traditional readings have served to keep power concentrated in too few hands for too long." The king stood, his presence suddenly filling the chamber. "My son sees truth without eyes. Perhaps it's time the rest of us learned to do the same." He gestured to both books lying on the council table. "The trials will begin at dawn tomorrow. Let us see what kind of Queen Lady Arya might become when judged by true laws rather than false traditions." Arya felt Thaddeus's hand find hers under the table. In challenging the ancient laws, they had stumbled upon something even more powerful. Truth that had been waiting generations to be heard. The night before the trials, Arya couldn't sleep. She paced her chamber in the palace, where she'd been moved for propriety's sake. The room was luxurious, filled with the kind of beauty she'd once taken for granted. But it was the mirror that held her attention. A full-length glass in an ornate golden frame, impossible to avoid. In a fit of frustration, she'd thrown her hairbrush at it earlier. Now the glass was spider-webbed with cracks, turning her reflection into a fractured mosaic. Each piece showed a different version of her. Here the scarred cheek, there the proud tilt of her chin, elsewhere the fear in her eyes. "Which one is real?" she whispered to her shattered reflection. "Which one is truly me?" A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Marcus or one of the palace servants. Instead, old Sarah entered, carrying a familiar wooden box. "I thought you might want this tonight." Arya recognized her mother's jewelry box, saved from the fire like so many other precious things. "How did you—" "A good housekeeper never reveals all her secrets." Sarah set the box on the dressing table. "But more importantly, a good housekeeper knows when her lady needs reminding of who she is." She opened the box, revealing not just jewelry but small mementos, a dried flower from the northern estate gardens, a child's drawing, a letter written in Duchess Katerina's elegant hand. At the bottom lay a small hand mirror, its silver surface tarnished but intact. "Your mother used to say that mirrors lie," Sarah said, lifting out the silver glass. "They show only the surface, only what others can see. But true reflection comes from within." Arya took the mirror with trembling hands. "I'm afraid, Sarah, not of the trials themselves, but of failing everyone who has put their faith in me. The common people who need change, Thaddeus who loves me, you who have protected my mother's legacy." "Look again," Sarah commanded, positioning the mirror so Arya could see herself clearly in the unbroken silver. "What do you see?" "Scars. Always the scars." "Look deeper." Arya forced herself to really look, past the surface marks to what lay beneath. She saw the determination in her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength that had carried her through 10 years of isolation. She saw her mother's features in the curve of her cheek, her father's resolve in the set of her mouth. "I see." She paused, understanding finally dawning. "I see someone who survived, who helped others even when she was hurting, who never let bitterness poison her heart." "Now you're seeing truly," Sarah smiled. "The trials tomorrow, they're not about proving yourself to others. They're about claiming who you already are." A crash from the hallway startled them both. The door burst open, revealing Marcus with his sword drawn. "My lady, you need to leave. Now." "What's happening?" "Lady Regina has escaped custody. And she's not alone. There are reports of armed men in the palace." Arya's heart raced, but her mind was suddenly clear. She reached for her herbalist's journal and her mother's ring. "The passages behind the kitchens are already watched," Marcus interrupted. "They know all the common escape routes." Old Sarah straightened, her eyes glinting. "But they don't know the housekeeper's ways. Come!" As they hurried through darkened corridors, following Sarah's sure steps, Arya clutched her mother's silver mirror. In its reflection, she caught glimpses of shadows moving behind them, pursuit closing in. They reached a narrow door hidden behind a tapestry. Sarah's hands moved quickly over the wood, pressing secret catches. "This leads to the old bell tower. From there—" A cold voice cut through the darkness. From there you have nowhere to go. Lady Regina stepped into the torchlight, followed by two armed men. Her thin face was twisted with hatred. Did you think I would let you destroy everything? Let common blood pollute the royal line? The only pollution here is prejudice, Arya said quietly, stepping forward. In her hand, the silver mirror caught the torchlight, throwing it back like a blade. Brave words from a scarred nobody. No. Arya's voice grew stronger. Brave words from the daughter of Duchess Katerina, from a healer who has earned the people's trust, from a woman who refuses to let fear rule her life or her kingdom. The mirror in her hand reflected not just light now, but truth, showing Lady Regina's beauty twisted by hatred, showing the humanity in the armed men's uncertain faces, showing Arya herself standing tall and unafraid. You're nothing but a... Regina's words cut off as bells began to toll above them, not the gentle bells of evening prayer, but the sharp, urgent peals of warning. Marcus smiled grimly. That would be Prince Thaddeus, raising the alarm. The palace. Guard will be here any moment. Regina's face contorted. Then we finish this now. She drew a thin blade from her sleeve, its edge gleaming with something darker than steel. Let's see if your noble spirit can survive when the flesh fails. The great hall erupted in chaos as Arya burst through the doors, Lady Regina's poisoned blade still clutched in her hand. Behind her, palace guards dragged in the would-be assassins, while Regina herself was held firmly between two of Thaddeus's most trusted men. The council is already assembled for the trials, Marcus murmured as they entered. Perfect timing. Indeed, the full court was present, having gathered for what they thought would be Arya's testing. Instead, they were about to witness a very different kind of trial. The king rose from his throne, his face thunderous. What is the meaning of this? Arya stepped forward, holding up the poison-coated blade. Your Majesty, I present evidence of attempted murder, both past and present. She placed Regina's weapon on the council table beside a small wooden disc, a simple thing, carved with the symbol of truth-sworn witnesses. And I call for the right of public testimony. Lord Chancellor Edmund lifted the witness token, examining its ancient markings. The right is granted. Who stands as witness? I do. The voice was small but clear. The scullery maid from Arya's childhood stepped out from behind old Sarah, her hands trembling, but her chin high. I saw what truly happened the night of the fire. Lady Regina lunged against her captors. You would take the word of a serving girl over a noble lady? Silence. The king's voice cracked like thunder. The witness token has been presented. By our oldest laws, all who speak under its protection must be heard. The maid, Emma was her name, Arya suddenly remembered, stepped into the center of the hall. The witness token was placed in her hands, and she gripped it like a shield. I was cleaning the study that night, she began. Lady Regina came with documents for the Duke to sign, something about bloodline purity and inheritance. But when he read them, he got angry. He said he would never support such hatred. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. She left in a rage, but she came back later when the house was quiet. I saw her pour something on the curtains in the study and the east wing. Then she took papers from the Duke's desk and threw them in the fireplace. Within minutes, the flames... She shuddered. They spread so fast, too fast to be natural. The hall had grown deathly quiet. Even Lady Regina's face had lost its arrogant sneer, replacing it with something closer to fear. Further evidence, my lords and ladies. Old Sarah stepped forward, producing the housekeeper's record. The true record shows that similar fires struck 3 other noble houses in those years, all after they opposed measures to restrict inheritance to pure bloodlines. Lies, Regina shrieked. Common servants conspiring against their betters. No, Arya said quietly. Truth breaking through deception, like healing herbs growing through cracks in stone. She turned to face the assembled court. You all know me as the scarred one, but these scars, they're proof of survival, proof that beauty, And worth can survive fire and pain, proof that what matters lies deeper than skin. She held up her mother's silver mirror, letting it catch and reflect the morning light across the hall. Look at yourselves, truly. See what prejudice and fear have done to our kingdom. While we fought over bloodlines and appearance, our people suffered. While we clung to false traditions, true nobility was forgotten. The light from the mirror swept across faces in the crowd, some angry, some thoughtful, some awakening to long-buried truths. The trials, Arya continued, were meant to test character, not appearance, to ensure rulers who would serve all people, not just the privileged few. I stand ready to face those true trials, not to prove my worth to you, but to prove that change is possible, that healing can come from unexpected places, that true beauty shines through actions, not appearances. The king stood, his eyes moving from the poison-coated blade to the witness token to the faces of his assembled court. The evidence is clear. Lady Regina will face justice for her crimes. He turned to Arya. As for you, Lady Arya, it seems you have already begun your trials. The test of spirit requires wisdom in the face of challenge. I cannot think of a more vivid demonstration than what we have witnessed today. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Even some of Lady Victoria's supporters were nodding slowly, their certainty shaken by the morning's revelations. The remaining trials will proceed, the king declared. But let all present remember what we have seen here, that truth, like beauty, comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful nobility is found in those who have faced fire and emerged stronger. The second trial, the test of beauty, began at noon. Arya stood before the court wearing a silver veil so fine it seemed woven from mist. The traditional garment was meant to hide the candidate's face until the moment of judgment, but Arya could feel its deeper significance. This was the last barrier between her past and future, between hiding and acceptance. The test of beauty, Lord Chancellor Edmund announced, traditionally required physical perfection in all aspects. However, as we have been reminded, its true purpose was to ensure that future rulers would reflect the beauty of spirit that inspires others. He turned to Arya. Remove your veil, Lady Arya, and show us what true beauty means. The hall fell silent. This was the moment many had been waiting for, some eagerly, others with dread. Most of the court had only glimpsed her scars in shadow or partial light. Now, under the bright afternoon sun streaming through the great windows, there would be nowhere to hide. Arya's hands rose to the veil's delicate fastening. In the front row, she could see old Sarah nodding encouragingly. Beside her throne, even the queen leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful rather than critical. Wait. Thaddeus's voice carried clearly through the hall. He stood, moving, with sure steps toward Arya. If this is truly a test of beauty's deeper meaning, let me demonstrate what I see. He reached her side, his unseeing eyes somehow finding her face. When I first met you, I saw your beauty in the gentleness of your hands as you treated the sick. I heard it in your voice when you spoke of healing others. I felt it in your courage when you faced your fears. His fingers found the edge of her veil. May I? Arya nodded, then remembered he couldn't see. Yes, she whispered. With infinite care, Thaddeus lifted the silver veil. His fingers brushed her cheeks, tracing the path of her scars with such tenderness that tears sprang to her. "Eyes this," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "is beauty. Each mark tells a story of survival, of choosing to help others despite your own pain, of finding light in darkness." His hands framed her face. "I may be blind, but I see her more clearly than any of you who judge with only your eyes." A gasp went through the crowd as the veil fell away completely. But it wasn't the sound of horror Arya had feared. There was something else in it, recognition perhaps, or awakening. She turned to face the court fully, her head high. The afternoon sun caught her scars, turning them from marks of shame into something else, badges of courage, maps of survival. The silver veil pooled at her feet like fallen shadows. "You see my scars," she said clearly. "They are part of who I am, but they are not all that I am." She gestured to the people gathered in the hall. "Every one of us bears scars, some visible, some hidden. They are not our shame, they are our story." From the crowd a voice called out, "She healed my son when no one else would help." Another joined in, "She saved my father during the rebellion." More voices rose, a chorus of testimony to beauty expressed through action rather than appearance. The queen stood slowly, silencing the hall. She descended from her throne with measured steps until she stood before Arya. Her eyes studied Arya's, face with an intensity that reminded her of her mother's gaze. "I knew Duchess Katerina well," the queen said softly. "She taught me that true beauty lies in the courage to be oneself, completely and without apology." She touched Arya's scarred cheek gently. "You are your mother's daughter, and you have passed this trial not despite your scars, but because of how you have carried them." She turned to face the court. "The test of beauty is complete. Lady Arya has shown us that real beauty cannot be measured by mere appearance, but by the light that shines through whatever vessels we are given." The silver veil lay forgotten on the floor as Arya stood in the full light of day, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. She felt Thaddeus's hand find hers, and in that moment she was not the scarred one, or even Lady Arya. She was simply herself, complete and unashamed. The Queen's voice rose again. "Let it be recorded that on this day we all learned to see beauty anew." The sealed orders were discovered in Lady Regina's chambers during the preparations for the final trial. Marcus himself found them, hidden in a false bottom of her jewelry box. The documents bore the crests of 5 noble houses, all pledged to what they called the preservation of pure royal blood. "It's worse than we thought," Marcus said, spreading the papers before Arya and Thaddeus in the prince's private study. "This wasn't just about stopping your marriage. They planned to use the confusion to seize power entirely." Arya studied the orders, her healer's training helping her spot the subtle signs of poison preparation in the marginalia. They meant to kill more than just Thaddeus. "Look, these measurements, these herbs. They were planning something at the coronation feast." "My father?" Thaddeus's hands tightened on his carved staff, and half the council. Arya pointed to a list of names. Anyone who might oppose their vision of pure rule. A knock at the door made them all tense, but it was old Sarah who entered, her face grave. "The conspirators are moving earlier than planned. Lady Victoria's troops have been seen gathering at the city gates." "How many houses support her?" Thaddeus asked. 5 openly, but there are rumors that others wait to see which way the wind blows. Sarah's eyes met Arya's. "They're using your final trial as cover. While all eyes are on the test of birth, they'll strike." Arya finished. She looked down at her mother's ring, still hanging from its chain. "They think they know all. The noble bloodlines, all the ancient claims. But my mother taught me something about true nobility that they've forgotten." She moved to the window, looking out over the city where torches were beginning to light the gathering dusk. In the distance, she could see movement at the gates, troops assembling under cover of evening shadows. "The test of birth was never about proving pure blood," she said slowly. "It was about proving connection to the land and its people, about showing that a ruler understands all their subjects, not just the privileged few." "What are you thinking?" Thaddeus moved to her side, his unseeing eyes turned toward the city. "I'm thinking it's time to show them what real power looks like." She turned to Marcus. "How quickly can you get messages to the merchant guilds, the craft halls, the village healers?" Understanding dawned on his face. "You mean to call in all your debts?" "Not debts. Trust." She touched her scars, remembering every person she'd helped, every life she'd touched during her years in hiding. "Lady Victoria thinks power comes from pure bloodlines. Let's show her it comes from the people themselves. The common folk won't." "Stand against noble troops," Sarah warned. "They won't have to. Arya's voice was firm. This isn't about fighting, it's about showing them they've already lost. She moved to Thaddeus's desk, pulling out parchment and ink. Sarah, I need you to gather the other housekeepers, the ones who keep the true records. Marcus, alert every person I ever healed, every family I helped. Tell them it's time to repay kindness with truth. And me, Thaddeus asked softly. You, my love, need to call a full court assembly. Tonight, before they can strike. Let Lady Victoria think it's about my trial of birth. She smiled, though he couldn't see it. It's time to show everyone what true nobility looks like. As her allies rushed to fulfill their tasks, Arya began to write. Not battle plans or strategic orders, but something far more powerful. The truth. The story of a kingdom divided not by birth or beauty, but by fear. The story of how healing could come from the most unexpected places. The sealed orders still lay on the desk, their dark promises overshadowed by the simple power of her words. Outside, the city began to stir as messages spread from house to house, shop to shop, heart to heart. A different kind of army was assembling, not with weapons, but with stories of kindness, of healing, of truth. Lady Victoria thought she was facing one scarred noble with a questionable claim to power. She was about to learn that true authority came not from pure blood, but from pure purpose. And Arya's purpose had been proven in every life she'd touched, every person she'd helped, every truth she'd preserved through years of hiding. The final trial was about to begin, but not in the way anyone expected. The great hall had never seen such a gathering. As nobles took their traditional places for Arya's trial of birth, the spaces between and behind them filled with faces rarely seen at court. Merchants in their gilt robes, craftsmen with tools still hanging from their belts, village healers carrying herb pouches like badges of office. And behind them all, row upon row of common folk, each one holding a single piece of parchment. Lady Victoria's face twisted as she surveyed the crowd. What is the meaning of this? The trial of birth is for nobles only. The trial of birth, Arya's voice rang out clear and strong, is about proving one's connection to the kingdom itself. And what is a kingdom, if not its people? She stood before the throne in a simple grey dress, unadorned except for her mother's ring, now worn openly on her hand. No more hiding, no more shadows. You speak of pure blood, she continued, addressing the assembled nobles. But blood means nothing without the heart that pumps it, the purpose that drives it. She gestured to the crowd. These are my witnesses. Each holds testimony to a moment of healing, of help freely given, of nobility proven through action rather than ancestry. The people began to move forward, one by one, placing their parchments on the great table before the throne. Each piece bore a seal, not of noble houses, but of guilds, villages, families. Together they formed something unprecedented, a people's petition, witnessing the true worth of their healer. I treated fever in the merchants' quarter, Arya said, as the papers piled up. Mixed poultices for craftsmen's burns, delivered babies in noble houses and common hovels alike. And in each place I saw the same truth, that worth is not inherited in blood, but proven in deeds. A murmur ran through the crowd as old Sarah stepped forward, carrying the true record. The housekeeper's records show that Lady Arya has served this kingdom more faithfully in her years of exile than many who claimed pure nobility. While some plotted to seize power through bloodshed, she worked to preserve life through healing. Lady Victoria surged to her feet. This is ridiculous. Guards, clear these common... But her words died as her guards stood motionless. One by one, they removed their weapons, laying them down before joining the crowd. Through the windows they could all see the same thing happening in the courtyard below. Victoria's assembled troops laying down their arms as citizens emerged from every doorway, every shop, every home. Your soldiers have families too, Marcus said quietly. Families that the scarred healer helped when no one else would. The king rose slowly from his throne. He walked to the table, examining the pile of testimonials that had grown into a mountain. Of witness. His fingers traced the simple seals, bakers, blacksmiths, farmers, weavers. The trial of birth, he said thoughtfully, was indeed meant to prove connection to the kingdom, to show that a ruler understands and serves all their people, not just a privileged few. He looked up at Arya. I can think of no more profound proof of such connection than this. This is absurd! Lady Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. You would let a scarred nobody with an army of peasants— An army, Arya interrupted softly. Look again, my lady. Do you see weapons, threats, violence? She spread her hands, indicating the peaceful gathering. This is not an army. This is a kingdom coming together to speak truth, to show that real power comes not from conquest, but from connection. The people's petition had grown so large it was spilling off the table. Each piece of parchment told a story, of healing given freely, of kindness in dark times, of nobility proven through service rather than ceremony. The trial of birth is complete, the king declared. Lady Arya has proven her connection to this kingdom more thoroughly than any candidate in our history. He turned to face the conspirators. And in doing so, she has exposed those who would tear us apart for their own gain. Lady Victoria's face had gone ashen as she watched her supporters melting away, drawn by the stronger power of truth and unity. The sealed orders in her pocket, planning death and destruction, felt suddenly heavy as stone. Your Majesty, she began, but it was too late. The king's voice rang out, Guards, arrest Lady Victoria and her conspirators. Their plot against the crown ends today. As Victoria was led away, Arya felt Thaddeus's hand find hers. Together, they faced the gathered kingdom, nobles and commons alike, all witnessing the birth of something new, not a revolution of violence, but a revolution of hearts, proven in the simple power of healing, help and hope. Dawn broke over the kingdom in shades of gold and rose, as if nature itself was celebrating. The palace artisans had worked through the night to complete the Unity Crown, a masterpiece that broke with centuries of tradition. Instead of jewels and precious metals alone, the crown incorporated healing herbs, preserved in crystal, wooden, inlays from the royal forest, and iron from the city forges. Each element represented a different part of the kingdom, all woven together in harmony. Arya stood before her mirror, whole now, not shattered, as old Sarah helped her dress for the ceremony. Her wedding gown was another departure from tradition. Instead of pure white, it was the deep blue of healing herbs, embroidered with silver threads that caught the light like stars. Your mother would be proud, Sarah said softly, adjusting the gown's flow, not just of what you've achieved, but of who you've become. We've all become something new, Arya replied, touching her scars without flinching. They were part of her story now, as natural as breathing. The ceremony itself broke every convention. Instead of being held in the formal throne room, it took place in the palace gardens, where anyone could attend. Nobles stood shoulder to shoulder with merchants and craftsmen. Village healers shared space with royal physicians. The old barriers had begun to crumble. Thaddeus waited beneath an arch, woven with healing herbs and wildflowers. His carved staff had been polished to a warm glow, its stories now part of the kingdom's larger tale. When Arya reached him, he touched, her face gently reading her presence in his own way. I see you, he said softly. And I see you, she replied, understanding the deeper truth in those simple words. The king himself performed the ceremony, but with significant changes to the traditional vows. Gone were the promises of obedience and submission. In their place were pledges of partnership, of working together to heal the kingdom's wounds. The moment the Unity Crown was placed on their joined hands, a cheer rose up that shook the garden. It wasn't just celebration, it was relief, hope, joy at seeing change finally come. But it was what happened next that would be remembered for generations. As music began to play, Arya and Thaddeus moved among the crowd, touching hands, sharing words, breaking down the last walls between ruler and ruled. They danced not just with nobles, but with merchants, craftsmen, healers, everyone who had helped build their victory. The unity crown passed from hand to hand, each person touching it, adding their own blessing. By the time it returned to them, it had been transformed again, not just a symbol of royal power, but of community, of connection, of shared purpose. As evening fell, lanterns were lit throughout the garden, hundreds of them, each containing a single healing herb. Their combined fragrance filled the air, reminiscent of Arya's cottage in the forest, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. "Tell me what you see," Thaddeus whispered, as they stood together in the gathering dusk. Arya looked out over their kingdom, their people, and smiled. "I see healing, not just of bodies or titles, but of the spirit that connects us all. I see strength in our scars, beauty in our differences, and hope in our unity." "Then we have truly succeeded," he said, squeezing her hand. Above them, stars began to appear, their light reflecting off the unity crown like countless small blessings. The kingdom had changed, and with it, all of them. They had learned to see with more than their eyes, to judge with more than tradition, to lead with more than power. As the celebration continued around them, Arya touched the herbs woven into her crown. Each one had a purpose, a healing property, a story to tell. Like the kingdom itself, their strength came not from separation, but from how they worked together. The night air carried the sound of music, laughter, and something else, the whisper of change, of growth, of new life-taking. Root in fertile soil, spring had come to the kingdom at last, and with it the promise of renewal. 1 year later, on the anniversary of their wedding, Arya and Thaddeus stood in the great hall to sign the new kingdom charter. The document was unlike any that had come before it, written not on precious vellum but on sturdy paper that any citizen could read and touch. Its words were simple, clear, free from the ornate language that had often hidden cruel intentions in beautiful phrases. "Let it be known," Arya read aloud to the assembled kingdom, "that worth is measured not in blood or beauty, but in actions. That nobility is proven through service, not birth. That leadership means healing divisions, not creating them." Her fingers traced the signatures already adorning the document. Not just nobles, but guildmasters, village elders, healers, and craftsmen. Each name represented a voice in the kingdom's new council, where all people's concerns could be heard. The charter's most radical change lay in its requirements for future rulers. Gone were the tests of physical perfection and pure bloodlines. Instead, candidates for leadership would be judged by their service to others, their wisdom in facing challenges, and their ability to unite rather than divide. Some said we were destroying tradition. Thaddeus addressed the crowd, his carved staff now bearing new stories of their shared triumph. But true tradition is not about preserving the past exactly as it was. It's about carrying forward what was best while letting go of what caused harm. Arya looked out over the gathered faces, so different from the fearful, divided crowd that had first witnessed their union. Now nobles and commons mixed freely, sharing ideas and resources. The healing arts were taught openly, combining royal physicians' knowledge with village healers' wisdom. Even the palace itself had transformed, its gates open to all who sought help or counsel. Their personal changes were just as profound. Arya's scars had become a symbol of hope to others who bore visible marks of survival. Thaddeus's blindness was now seen as a gift that had helped him see truth when others were blinded by prejudice. Together, they had shown that perfection was less powerful than authenticity. "The true test of our success," Arya said softly as she signed the charter, "will be what grows from the seeds we've planted." Already, those seeds were bearing fruit. The merchant guilds reported increased trade as artificial barriers fell. Village healers shared knowledge freely with royal physicians, combining their skills to fight disease more effectively. Even the noble houses had begun to change, choosing marriages based on character rather than just bloodlines. The old music box from the northern estate now sat in a place of honor, its melody playing freely as a reminder of where they had begun. Beside it lay the silver mirror, the poisoned teacup, the witness token, artifacts of their journey preserved not to dwell on past pain, but to remember how far they had come. Every scar has a story, Arya often told the children who now came, freely to the palace to learn healing arts. And every story has power if we're brave enough to tell it truly. As twilight fell on their first anniversary, Arya and Thaddeus stood in their private garden where healing herbs now grew alongside. Royal roses, the unity crown rested lightly on their joined hands, its elements gleaming in the fading light. "Tell me what you see," Thaddeus said, repeating the words that had become their private ritual. Arya looked out over their kingdom, really their shared home now, and smiled. "I see hope taking root. I see strength in our scars. I see beauty in our differences, and most of all, I see love powerful enough to heal not just two hearts, but an entire realm." "Then we have succeeded," he replied, drawing her close. Above them stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their struggles, their triumph. But now they shone on a kingdom transformed, where worth was, measured by the light within, and even the deepest scars could become marks of beauty. The new charter was more than just a document. It was a promise to future generations that true nobility would always be found in the heart, that real power lay in healing rather than hurting, and that love, pure, accepting, transformative love, could change not just two people, but an entire world. And so their story became part of the kingdom's larger tale, not an ending, but a beginning. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from scorched earth, that the strongest healing comes from those who have known pain, and that true sight requires looking beyond the surface to the heart that beats beneath.